Good morning, my name's Stewart MacGlashen, and today I've got the pleasure of giving the latest in a series of presentations for the soldiers of Killiecrankie. My topic today is All Clune, a village I'm very familiar with. I was born and brought up here many years ago, and I've probably forgotten more than I ever remember, but anyway, here goes. I'm joined today by my cameraman, James Rattery, and we'll be having a walk around the village. Right.
So when did you actually live here, Stuart?
I was here throughout the 1950s, about from 1952, middle 1960s. Aldclune, for those that don't know it, it's a small village about 1 mile north of Killiecrankie, and it's on the B8079 now, but originally this was the main road north for many years, the old A9 as they still call it in these parts. So I hope you'll join me in a walk through the village and the surrounding area, and this will also be a journey back through time from the present day right through to the Neolithic period. And we'll hopefully get a glimpse of life, a glimpse of what life in the village was like throughout the centuries. This is a map of All Clune with some of the sites that we're about to go and look at today. This is the village itself. The layout's very similar to Stobie's map of 1780 and Roy's map of 1750. So that's the village, and this is the path up the burn, the Drove Road. The first reference to All Clune was as far back as 1475, when it was mentioned in a charter. Not directly, but it was referred to as the Clunes. And the Clunes, it's still an expression that's used to this day, and certainly in the archives of Atholl estates referred to two large farms, Clunebeg, Clunemore and All Clune. The layout is remarkably unchanged, the layout of the buildings over the last few hundred years. If you look back old maps, Stobie's map of 1780 or Roy's map of 1750, the houses, or the original houses today, are still much in the same place, although they're not the same houses. Most of these houses you see today were built in the middle of the 19th century, and they were built for Atholl estate workers and their retired workers. And at the time I lived here, even then, the houses each had two small fields, and this was to supplement the income, particularly for the retired people in the days when there was no pension or social security benefits. They could be at least partially self-sufficient. In my own time, I can remember some of our neighbours kept a cow. My grandfather also lived here. He kept a cow, and there was a couple of other people kept a cow. My father, as a hobby, although he had a day job, he kept 10 or 12 sheep. And he kept them quite successfully in the small fields. I'll digress a little here and just tell you a little amusing story. I recall my father one day went to Perth Market and probably spent more than he should have done on a tup or a ram, a male sheep, to bring home. And the idea was he would breed some top-class lambs and make some money out of it. And they unfortunately, the tip and the sheep were in a field next door to this old lady called Teeny Robertson, and she made her and the ram became very good friends. She christened them Trottums. And anyway, every day and every lunchtime, Trottums would get half a loaf of bread to eat and cakes, and they soon grew enormously fat, and there was no hope of them ever catching a sheep, never mind producing any lambs. And the next spring we had 0 lambs, and my My father was absolutely livid with this old lady. And poor old Trottums went off to the slaughterhouse and ended up as mutton pie. But anyway, just back to the houses themselves, as well as our little crofts, our small fields. They also had very generous gardens, and some of the houses or gardens were on the other side of the barn, and each of them had a little wooden bridge that they could access their gardens with. There was 4 wooden bridges in all. In my time, most of the villagers were retired people, very old people, and most of them were very fit and healthy, and in their 80s and even 90s who would walk to Killiecrankie a mile away, get the messages, get their papers, and it attracted the attention of the newspapers, and there was at least one article written about the longevity of the people and the good health, and put it down to their environment that they lived in. Behind us is the burn. This is the All Clune burn that runs through the village, and it's also the parish boundary between Blair Atholl parish and Mullen parish. On the west side of the burn we have Blair Atholl, and on the east side of the burn we have Mullen. And as I recall, in these days most people went to church, and the people every Sunday morning on this side of the burn would head for Blair Atholl, and the people on this side of the burn, and there weren't too many of them, would head for Tenedry Church, which is an outpost of the Mullen Church. The village takes its name from the Aldclune burn, which is running down here today with a good head of water in it. That's Gaelic for Aldclune, is literally meadow burn. So round about this we have meadows, flattish ground, and the burn running through it. Idyllic situation. Behind the village, on this steep knoll here, is wood, and nowadays mostly birch and aspen, but when I lived here it was mainly oak and beech, so it was a long established wood. And looking back on the old maps, Stobie's map and Roy's map of the 1700s, the woods were pretty much in exactly the same place as they are today. This bell wood behind us, so called because there was a bell hung on a scaffold at the top of the knoll here, and this was probably associated with the church that was here at the time. The church was an Episcopal church, and the bell would be hung up there to summon the congregation every Sunday. It wasn't a church as such, it was a chapel. It was an outlier of Kilmavionig Church. It was an Episcopalian church, as indeed Kilmavionig was, and in 1746 General Hawley, who was carrying out a bit of retribution in the area, particularly against the Episcopalians, who were mainly Jacobite, and he burned down, or he didn't do it personally, but his dragoons burnt down the church. No trace of it remains today, unfortunately. Although in 1925 I did read an article, somebody reported that there was one old recumbent gravestone on the site of the church, and also interestingly the graves of 2 soldiers, because tradition here that the stories that I heard as a youngster was that at the Battle of Killiecrankie 2 young officers were sent ahead to, quote, secure the knolls at All Clune, and they met with an untimely death, I guess in the Highland Charge, and they were buried in the churchyard at All Clune. But apparently their graves were still evident in 1925. In all my time I lived here, I was never aware of any graves there, or indeed the exact location of the churchyard. Oh well, good exercise this, if nothing else. You can see where it was damaged there. So this is a bridge over the A9 that was built in the months of July and August 1734. by the Duke of Atholl. And this carried the main A9 north between Perth and Inverness for many years. I don't know if you can see here, but on the right of the arch there's been extensive repairs carried out to the bridge. This has been the result of a great storm in 1953, in June 1953. I remember it very well because we were taken home from school across the fields. The road was closed, the road was flooded at Killiecrankie, and what had happened was the burn actually originates at Lochmorag, about a couple of miles further up the glen, and it's an artificial loch, and the retaining dam broke and all the water, not all the water, but a lot of the water from Lochmorag poured out and come roaring down here in a torrent and washed away a large part of the bridge. The road was closed for several days until they made temporary repairs. And if James wants to swing the camera around, you'll see a house on the other side of the burn here. This house, in the living room of this house, the water was a foot or 2 foot deep. It gives you an idea how much water there was. And on the other side, this is Atholl Cottage. At the other side, the water was right up to the door there. So it was one of the highlights of my time in the village.
Where are we going now?
Right along to the end. I think it's locked. Okay, now we're standing in front of the first house. We come to in All Clune, travelling into the village from the north. This was called the Old Schoolhouse, although we have searched the records, and to date we haven't actually found a record of a school here. It was built in 1862, as we can see from the date above the door, but there's no record of it ever being used as a school, which is a bit puzzling. Although in the 1841 census, the occupation of one of the people in All Clune was a schoolmistress. She was a young lady, so it's possible there was a school then. What may have happened is the school may have been built as a school, but by the time it was built, Killiecrankie School was built, and obviously it was a school at Blair Atholl, so it maybe was never used as a school. Other evidence that it may be a school is the windows. They're totally different from the windows in other houses built in the village around the time. And the room there with the double windows is, well, certainly was in my time, a pretty large room compared with the other houses. So it's more evidence that it may well have been at least designed as a school, if indeed it was ever used as one. The adjoining house would be the schoolhouse. Just before we leave the schoolhouse, to the left there, where the new houses are, they were built fairly recently, I would think maybe in the 70s or so, but that was one of the fields that was attached to our house where my father kept sheep, and the fields extended beyond the houses and over where the plantation is now, that was all field for grazing.
And the lady who fattened your dad's tup, where did she live?
She lived in the schoolhouse here, and she would feed him all kinds of cakes and bread every day. He was an enormous tup that could hardly move. So next to the schoolhouse we have houses built at a slightly earlier date, probably in the 1840s, and this is now 2 houses. In my day there was 3 houses there, tiny houses with 2 rooms, a tiny living room and a tiny bedroom, and it was normally single people that lived there.
Who would have built the houses?
They were all Atholl estate houses.
Yeah.
All the houses built around that time were built by Atholl estates for their workers.
So the next one is your house, isn't it?
Yeah, we can go back through the gate again. Okay, now we've moved along from the schoolhouse and into the centre of the metropolis. The house we're standing in front of now, it's called Dara Cottage, Dara being oak in Gaelic. When I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, opposite the house there was a very large oak tree, at least it seemed very large to me, and it was cut down to make way for what was then the new A9. But oddly enough, life goes on, and I notice over here we have a young oak tree, which I'd like to think is maybe the son or the daughter of the original. So it's very apt that the oak tree is right next door to Dara Cottage. Now this house, it was, although I've never found any record for it, that may well exist, was the post office. And it could well have been, because I remember at the time a massive front door. This is a different door, it's on it now, but it was about 4 inches thick solid oak, and it had big strong, two very large strong locks on it. So that might be an indication that it was a post office, sure enough. So opposite Dara Cottage, where what we call the new A9, that's the old A9 behind us, which is just used as an access road now, and then it was replaced with this one, and this is where the oak tree was. It was cut down to provide the road. But also it wasn't the oak tree that had to go. There was a roadman's house just almost opposite Dara Cottage here, and that belonged to the county council, and they had these houses every few miles on the A9, and the roadman was responsible for a section of road. Further along there was a railway cottage, and similarly the Highland Railway employed railwaymen to look after a section of the track, and the railway cottage along there was squeezed between the old A9 and the railway. It had no garden to speak of, and it was all squeezed in there. Also at the time, further to the east, at the other side of the barn, there was the footings of 2 ruined cottages, which also went, and also an unoccupied building. I think it had been a cottage at one time, and that was demolished. At one time there were, according to the archives at Atholl Estates, up to 20 houses here in the 1700s, early 1800s. So it was there probably is about 20 houses now, actually, with the new ones.
The Spencers.
Yeah, but her family lived there for 2 or 3 generations. They were Ross. I can remember old Mrs. Ross. She had a summer house about here, and used to, as a toddler, I used to come across the bridge and visit her and sit with her in her summer house. And she had a lot of stories too, but don't remember any of them, too young. So we're in front of Atholl Cottage now, and this is on the east side of the burn, across the burn from Dara Cottage. And this is the oldest house in All Clune, which is still inhabited. And the date you can see above the door, 1812. A little bit different from some of the later houses in that the windows are smaller and the gable ends are a different design. Now that's 1812. It predates the Battle of Waterloo by 3 years, so gives you an idea of how old it is. Beside Atholl Cottage, across the way, what used to be their byre and is now a bit of a ruin, This was a blacksmith shop or the smithy. In the 1800s in All Clune they had, according to the census, there was many types of tradesmen. There was joiners, blacksmiths, shoemakers, weavers. It was a busy little place. So now this is all that's left of the smithy. And what happened was at the other side of the barn there was the joiner's workshop, and the joiners or the cartwrights made wooden wheels, and they would swing them across the barn to the blacksmith shop, the smithy, and they would make iron hooks or iron tires for the wooden wheels. They would preheat them to an orange heat, and they would be shrink wrapped onto the wheel.
Can you see anything?
So there were steps down there and steps at the other side. And as I recall, there was a bit of a pool there, and there's no pool there anymore.
And the joiner's shop was over the other side?
Where the ivy's growing, yeah. It was a very peculiar building. It was a wooden building. The old plaster we used in these days, it was not like modern concrete.
What was it made of?
They would be sort of coarse sand and lime. I don't know what else to put in it. It was certainly not like modern concrete.
No. So what we're now going to do is cross over.
We'll go over and we'll start going up the side of the barn. Back into the castle archives. They've got, this was the buyer for our house.
So that's Atholl Cottage.
Yeah. So we're now walking up the side of the barn here, and this road, at one time the people in the village would take their livestock up to the summer shearings. There's good grazing, reasonably good grazing further up the barn. And it could probably also be used as a drove road, because this road here joins up with the road from Blair Atholl over to Stratharnell. And so the people would from time to time take their cattle or livestock to the market in Stratharnell. This house here was called Rose Cottage, and there's behind it there's a site of where the joiner's workshop used to be, the village joiner. We'll take a walk up there just now and take a look at where that was. This little patch here, there was a small lime kiln, or what I believe was a lime kiln, that's what I was told it was. These were used in years gone by to make slaked lime. The lime would be heated up and it would change its chemical composition, and to enable it to be used in the field as a soil improver.
Fantastic.
Many of them spread around the area, some of them very large, some of them like this one. So we're behind Rose Cottage now, and this was the site of the joiner's shop. On the background there you can see the remains of a stone wall and a hearth, but it was always like that. In my day it was a timber building that was there, and it had very peculiar windows. It had arched windows, which were sort of out of keeping with the joiner's shop. And apparently these windows were previously used in the Blair Castle wine cellar, and they were removed in 1829, and they were used for the joiner's shop here. So that building, that wooden building, presumably had been standing there since 1829.
So the joiner's shop was here when you were small?
It wasn't a joiner's shop, it was a storage shop, and an old gentleman, a retired Glasgow policeman called Hughie, lived in this house, and his house was like an Aladdin's cave. He had all kinds of stuff stored in this wooden building, which was formerly a joiner's shop, and he used to give me things from time to time. Valuable antiques it would be now, but I would play with them and break them. But his son and his grandson carried on their tradition in collecting stuff, because Duncan Hughie ran an antiques business in the area.
Stuart, you're telling us there you were most people here were old people.
Yeah, well, they were retired estate workers and so on.
And you were the one small child, were you?
Yeah. So it was like having a dozen grannies and granddads. You know, they were always pleased to see you. I used to go into everyone's house, you know, and they give you biscuits and sweets, and they needed people to talk to, so it was a good arrangement.
Fantastic.
So the next house in line, making our way up the burn side now, and this side, this is Larkwood Cottage, and the interesting thing about this cottage is that it has an ordnance benchmark on the wall. Now these used to be used to establish the height and the position of structures, and it was used as a sort of datum point for surveying in times gone by. It was down about this height somewhere. It would be either that side of the door or this side.
Right.
And what it looks like is there's a line and there's an arrow. It's like that. And that's about the size of it. And there's about, I read somewhere, there's something like 50,000 of them throughout the British Isles. That's known of. Not much to see really, a very simple mark, but unfortunately we can't look at it today because the present owners store their logs in front of it, so we don't want to move all those and put them back again.
Great, let's keep going.
All the houses on the east side of the burn, well, not all of them, but some of them, their gardens were on the other side, and each of those houses had a little wooden bridge that used to lead across to the gardens, and that's how they gained access. As I recall, there was 4 of these wooden bridges altogether. One opposite Dara Cottage, although our garden wasn't on that side. One for Rose Cottage, one here for Larkwood Cottage, and finally one for Weaver's Cottage, which is the only one still remaining, although it's not the original. And Weaver's Cottage is where we're going to head for now. This little burn here, if the mill pond was full, they would divert it back into the burn, and this is where it came down here. Here we are now at Ivy Cottage, as it's called, also known as the Weaver's House. And the outhouse to the left of it, that was the weaving shed. And interestingly, there was once a well right in the middle, in the floor, in the middle of the weaving shed. And this well was filled with continuously running water from the barn. It was piped underground, ran through the house and then back into the barn again. And I would speculate that this well would be used by the weavers for washing linen, because that's what they wove. It was they wove the flax into linen on, and dyeing as well. Apparently there's no trace of that anymore. It's all been refloored a long time ago, I should think. The house has been extensively done up, obviously.
And in your day, what was there? The well was there, was
There
it?
was there. I saw it once. I saw the place on the floor where it was. It would be covered over with a wood, with a wooden trap door or some such.
And who lived there?
The lady who lived there, she's been a big source of information. She's long gone, of course. She was a very old lady when I was young. It shows you how long ago that was. But her name was Nellie Patterson. And Nellie her mother was a Moon. And the Moon family came from the Isle of Man. The Duke of Atholl was the overlord of the Isle of Man. He inherited that title through his wife, who was a daughter of Lord Stanley, a very well-to-do English nobleman. And it's what the dukes did, Scottish dukes did in these days, because they never had any money. They would marry a rich heiress. Anyway, he ended up with the Isle of Man, and he brought over the Masons, this family of Masons called the Moons. And according to old Nellie, who was a direct descendant, the Duke stated that in all time to come, the Moons will always have a house on Atholl Estates if they wanted it. I don't believe there's any left though.
And she's a great source of information for you, wasn't she?
She was a great storyteller. She told many stories, some of which I'll relate today. But I would think about 90% of them, because I was only a child, I was only half interested in them, and I've probably forgotten a lot more than I can recall.
That's nothing.
Well, whatever I remember, I'll try and bring them forth.
So where are we off to next?
Right, we're going to go, and what we'll look at next is the oldest uninhabited building in the village that's still intact. Not as it was, but very close. And this is typical of the houses which existed before the present stone houses were built in the mid-1800s. This one here we're coming to, it probably dates back to the early 1800s, or more likely back into the 1700s. It doesn't have a name as far as I'm aware, but it's the oldest intact building. It's now covered, it's used as a storehouse now, and it's got a corrugated iron roof, but originally the roof would be thatched. The area we're standing in now, we don't know for sure, but somewhere round about here was the chapel at All Clune. And as I referred to before, in 1925 it was recorded that the only remains of the chapel were an old gravestone plus two graves of young officers who were killed on the government side during the battle, who were buried in the churchyard. And but now there's no sign of anything exists, but we do know it was around here somewhere where the Ivy Cottage or the Weaver's house now stands here. Maybe even on the same site for all we know.
And what about that wall up the back there? What's that? That's quite a substantial wall, isn't it?
It is now. That's a road. Larkwood Cottage, one of their fields, or the croft, was on the other side of the plantation there, where Aldclune house now is, and that was the road up to their field.
Okay.
It may have served another purpose in earlier times, but we don't know. Right, now we're standing at the Weaver's cottage, and then directly across the burn, across the footbridge, this ruin here, this was referred to as Will the Driver's house. Now, Will the Driver it was long before my time, but according to the old lady that lived here that told us all the stories, he was quite a character. And the term driver means drover, so will the drover, will the driver, if you like. And he was the last of the cattle drovers, so I imagine he must have operated in the late 1800s, early 1900s, before the advent of the railways. And
What was his surname?
Robertson.
Mr. Robertson.
Will Robertson. And he was often talked about, and I don't know if it's true, but it used to be whispered in local gossip that he was the father of quite a few of the old gentlemen and old ladies who lived in the village at the time. This road that we're standing on, this runs up the side of the barn, and it joins up with the road that goes over the hill from Blair Atholl across to Glen Brerekin and onward down Stratharnell to Kirkmichael. So it's quite possible from time to time he would drive cattle along this road over the hill, because there was quite an important market at Kirkmichael at that time. And of course it would be used for the villagers to take their livestock up to the summer shearings. Further up the burn, maybe a mile, couple of miles, there are many ruins from houses from the 1700s, and some of them would be farms. They're marked on the map as farms, and others are shearings. They're mainly on Lude's land, but they can still be seen there to this day. Some of them even date back to the time of the Battle of Killiecrankie. So later on we'll look at the site of the old corn mill, which used to be in All Clune. But while we're here, I'll just point out for that modern house it stands right on top of what used to be the mill dam for the mill.
We're heading on up here.
Yeah, we'll head for the kiss now. The woods on this little rough map that I've drawn are almost identical to the woodland marked on Stobie's map of 1780. So it shows you how little things have changed. A detour right over here to the edge of this wood. So we'll take a trip a little further back in time now and have a look at evidence of human activity from now thousands of years ago. And we'll start right at the top of the hill there. Clunemore Farm is on the skyline. It's a prominent house on the skyline, and up the hill and to the left there's a perfectly round hump also in the skyline. This is known as the Sheehan or the Fairies' Knoll, and the superstitious people in the old days were quite convinced that fairies lived there. In reality, it's a round barrow built by the Neolithic farmers, who were probably the first, certainly the first permanent people to put down roots in this area. Possibly hunter-gatherers were here before, but the settlements were first made by the Neolithic farmers. So that's about the earliest activity we have. Other things of interest, similar age, are cup-marked rocks, which are around here somewhere, but regrettably I don't know where. The only evidence I have is a photograph, and I can't even remember where I saw that. That would either be in the Atholl Country Life Museum or in one of John Kerr's wonderful books that he wrote several in the series about the area. But it's a photograph of a gentleman called Crawford Huey, who was the son of the person that lived in Rose Cottage in Old Clune, and he was standing beside demonstrating cup-marked rocks. These are strange impressions made in the rocks, and they're quite numerous in Scotland. In fact, they're quite numerous throughout Europe. and nobody knows the significance of them, but we do know they date from Neolithic times. So they're around there somewhere for someone that's got a mind to look for them. So both these references I've just made points to plausible evidence of a settlement in around All Clune for not hundreds of years but thousands of years, and almost certainly continuously. And what we can say with some certainty is that All Clune appeared on maps long before other nearby communities like Blair Atholl or Killiecrankie or Pitlochry, before they even existed. So All Clune's got a long pedigree. And while we're standing here, I'll just point out over to our left here, right under the A9 now, is an Iron Age fort. In fact, there were two Iron Age forts, or Pictish forts if you like, which were very close together, but when they built the present A9, the one was totally obliterated, and the other one is also now almost non-existent. It's not the pile of rocks you see in the foreground, but rather over a bit where you may see the cars driving past. So we'll now just retrace our steps, and we'll take a look at something just a little bit later than that. We're now standing close to small knoll in the foreground here, just through the trees, and the top of this is a stone-lined long kist. Now this is possibly late Iron Age, is about 500 metres northwest of Aldclune. And it appears to be similar to an Iron Age kist which was excavated in the 1970s or 80s in Blair Atholl, in which they found a beautifully preserved skeleton of an Iron Age or a Pictish man, which is now locked away in a cupboard in Perth Museum. And this kist, and indeed the one at Blair Atholl, might well be linked to the two Iron Age forts, which are just a couple of 100 metres away. So the two Iron Age forts, I'll just mention them again, they were, when they built the new A9, as it is, they built it right across the top of them. Now, 2 weeks before work began, a team of archaeologists was hurriedly put together, and they had 2 weeks to work to see what they could find about the forts. So they dug a trench all the way across the middle, and they had made even in that small excavation, they found quite a bit of interesting stuff, and most significantly, a piece of jewellery which is now known as the Old Clune brooch, which is arguably the finest piece of Iron Age jewellery from that period to be found in Scotland. And this now resides in the Museum of Antiquities in Edinburgh. If you can find it, it's locked away most of the time. But what we'll do is we'll just walk across now and take a look at the stone-lined kist and get a flavour from how they did their burials in these days. So give them an idea of size. That will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 foot 6, which is about right for an Iron Age man. Although the guy they found in Blair Atholl was 5 foot 9.
Sure.
He was tall for his age, but he would be an aristocrat, so he'd have been well fed. So we're now standing beside the Iron Age long kist here, and as you can see, it's stone lined with flat slabs, head and foot, and on either side. And the burial would have taken place in a prone position, as opposed to earlier burials where they, in the Bronze Age and so forth, they were buried in the crouched position. So this points to Iron Age. It's always been, as long as I remember it, it's been already excavated. Obviously it would have been a covered barrow like the one we've looked at, the Fairies Knoll, but in the 19th century, or maybe the early 20th century, so I've been told by the old people that lived here, there was a tourist who was an amateur archaeologist who spent some time in the area, and him and his mates they did their own excavation. What they found has never been recorded, but there's certainly nothing to be found now, and I'm not sure that this has actually been recorded anywhere else. I hope it'll remain in this state of preservation as it has done for the previous 1500 years or so. On the subject of the Iron Age, in the area, there was supposed to be a road which would be contemporary with the what we've just looked at, the burials and the forts. And I get this from an article I read in a magazine when I was a child, and I can find no trace of this anymore, so I don't know how genuine it is, but the story was certainly an authoritative article. It was a circular route, continued up the old drove road. I call it a drove road, but it would be used occasionally to drive cattle, but more often people would take their livestock up the hills to the shieling in the summer. We've just crossed the modern A9 where it crosses the All Clune burn, and this is the All Clune burn you see before you. It's cut its way through the rocks, the limestone rocks that are prevalent in the area, and we're just heading now up towards the old private cemetery below Orchel Farm. So just below this little waterfall here, there's a big pool, and this is where we used to catch the biggest fish in the burn these days. And we used to catch fish up to a quarter a pound, which was just about big enough to eat. There was a lot of flax growing went on in the 17th and 18th centuries in this area, and some of these big pools would be used as retting pools, and that was to soak the flax, to condition it so it could be spun into yarn for linen, which would be used by the weavers back in All Clune. We're at a higher elevation now, and we can see a bit more clearly the route of the Iron Age road, which apparently existed here, or traces of it existed and probably still do. But as far as I understand, the road ran down the side of the burn here, forded the river at All Clune, swept round the hillside there and over the top of the quarry. Obviously the quarry wasn't there at the time, but where the quarry is now. And I had read that a lot of it had been obliterated by the quarry, but intriguingly you can just make out what looks like tracks running up the hillside there. Now, I'm not saying that's the road that's referred to, the Iron Age road, but if it isn't, then it went pretty close to that route. Having passed the quarry, it then went back down the hill again towards the farm of Innervac, where it crossed the River Garry, and came out at where the Blair Castle West Lodge is now, and they followed a course presumably up behind the castle, possibly through Old Blair, and then crossed the River Tilt, and then headed along here past Lud, Strathgroy, and till round about here, where it would swing back down, follow the All Clune burn again, back down to All Clune. So it was a circular road. Why it was circular, I don't know, and I don't think anybody else does. It seems rather strange, but there must be some information on that somewhere. I read it in an article in a magazine many years ago, but up to now I haven't been able to find that anywhere online. So if anyone knows any more information about that than I do, I'll be very interested in hearing from them. Crossed over the burn, and this is the Atholl cemetery, the gravestone from 1760. We're now, we've walked up the east side of the Aldclune burn, and now we're walking down the west side towards the cemetery at Atholl, and beyond that the old mill at Aldclune. So we've walked a circular route. But just at this point in the burn was where the lathe for the mill was diverted off, and here you can see it quite clearly. The ditch, the depression on the ground there is where the water ran, and the point that left the burn is just there in the trees, just into the trees a bit. And it was when there was water in the burn, it must have been a very powerful mill, because the drop in the lathe, the gradient was quite steep, so it would, if there was a lot of water available, then it would get the mill turning at quite a commendable speed. More on that later. We'll have a look at the Atholl cemetery first. Okay, so now we're just approaching the mound, the knoll, where the old cemetery is. It's very, very close to the present A9, and we're a bit concerned that it's going to be destroyed, but we'll go and take a look and see what's there. Immediately adjacent to the A9 here, just north of All Clune, on this wooded knoll, is a private burial ground of the Stewarts of Atholl. Atholl is a small estate mentioned back in the 16th and 17th centuries, and this was our private burial ground. Not much to see here now, but what we do know exist is two recumbent stone slabs, gravestones. The one I'm standing on, it's underneath the turf, can't see it, but the one that lies alongside it, we've managed to scrape off the turf, so very difficult to see. But what it says here, there's initials. It says C and there's an S, roughly inscribed, and a date, and the date is 1760. But most interestingly, probably even more difficult to see, is this strange symbol here, which I'm tracing out. I don't know if you can see that, and don't really know what it is. Some people have suggested it's a Lochaber axe, but I honestly don't know. It doesn't look particularly like a Lochaber axe to me, so if anyone's got any suggestions, send them in. The situation of this graveyard is it's very close to the A9, where they're shortly going to start work on dualling the road, and we're a bit concerned that this little known graveyard could get damaged in the process. So these are the facts we see before us, but turning from fact to fiction now. When I was a kid, this place was well known for being haunted by a ghost called the Grey Lady, and as kids we used to scare each other with stories of the Grey Lady and so forth. And interestingly enough, quite recently, someone who was a stranger to the district happened to mention that we're driving up the A9 here one night, and they saw what they were convinced was a ghost standing right here where we're standing now, and it was dressed in strange costume, and it was a kind of grey colour. So Maybe the Grey Ladies put in a reappearance. The left flank of the government army at the Battle of Killiecrankie, this was our extreme left here, and as we understand from the writings at the time, they established a line on the left side on the knolls at All Clune, and this is likely to have been one of them, and that's reinforced by the fact that recent excavations carried out by the archaeologists found quite a heavy concentration of musket balls from both muskets and pistols in this sort of general area here. So this would be a very significant position. The position was overrun by the Highlanders charging down the hill here from Orchel Farm. That's Orchel Farm up there, and the clan that was prominent in this section of the battlefield were the MacLeans of Dewart, so they would have overrun the government positions here. And possibly the earlier story about the two young lieutenants being killed at the battle and being buried in the graveyard at All Clune, it was possibly right here that they died, but we don't know. Again, we surmise. Just over the A9 between the traffic, back down the other side of the burn here. There's a reference to a corn mill at All Clune as far back as 1546, and it was about installing new mill wheels. So we can assume that the mill was already established here by this time. And it's also recorded that the last time the mill operated was in 1811, and it closed, it was recorded as closed in 1812, which coincidentally is the same year that Atholl Cottage was built, and the mill stood somewhere in the area of Atholl Cottage, perhaps even on the same site. The water was drawn from the burn about half a mile upstream from here, and it came down a pretty steep gradient, so when there was a lot of water in the burn it would have been a good going mill, and the lade followed the track of where that little stream is just now. And the mill pond, when I was young, it was very clearly visible. It was circular in shape, and the outline was very clearly visible in the ground, and it stood almost exactly where that present day modern house is. So no trace of it to be found now. But we can go and look at where we think the mill stood, back down to where we are now. So we're now back at the old bridge now in All Clune itself, and we're looking again at Atholl Cottage, and the mill, the old mill, was somewhere in that area there. That green shed beside Atholl Cottage, it was possibly around about there, or perhaps just behind there. So the mill ceased operating, as we say, in 1811 and closed in 1812. So Atholl Cottage, the date above the door is 1812, so that was built at the same time as the mill was closed. So it might even be on that very spot, but we don't know for sure. Now this was a corn mill, and how it worked was the Atholl estates and any other estates in the area, they built the corn mills. They were the only people that would be able to afford to do that. But the deal was that all the local farmers round about were thirled to the mill. There was a system was called thirlage, and that meant that they were committed to taking their corn to their local mill, this mill here, and this mill only. They couldn't take it around and look for somewhere cheaper to do it on pain of death. And looking back the old Atholl Estates records, there's many instances where farmers have been fined or lost their tenantship, and it was a very serious business if they cheated and went somewhere else. And there's also been court cases of millers cheating the farmers, because the way the millers were paid, there was no money exchanged hands. The millers were paid in a portion of the corn that was ground. And another obligation that the tenants had was that they were responsible for the maintenance of the mill. So during the winter, when there wasn't much activity, the tenants would come to the mill, repair the mill wheel, and one of the jobs was these mill wheels, sandstone mill wheels, had to be changed quite frequently, and they were quarried up on Lud, on the Lud hillside quarry there, and they had to be dragged down to the various mills, in this case All Clune. So they had to give so many days of their labour freely to the miller. And there was also a portion that was to be given to the assistant miller. So there was a lot of room for jiggery-pokery there and cheating, and it often arrived before the barony court at Loggery. There are other mills in this area which were flax mills. Flax was grown here at one time, and it supported the cottage weaving industry. Linen was woven. We've seen earlier the weaver's cottage that was used for this purpose. And on the burn here, further up the burn, there are pools, deep pools, which would have been used as retting pools. That was to condition the flax. They would soak it in water and condition it so it could be woven into yarn for linen.
So tell me, why would people not want to use that one miller and go to another miller? What was the reason?
I could only speculate, but perhaps they would get it done cheaper. They wouldn't have to supply labour or give them so much of their grain and compensation. But another reason, and which is stated quite clearly, is that this mill here at All Clune was often in the summertime, it would be a problem with water supply. Right now there's loads of water in the burn. Would have turned the mill wheel quite rapidly. Everyone would have been happy. But just as happens at Blair Atholl mill today, if the river or the burn is very low, not enough water to turn the wheel. So the grain could lie for weeks on end. It wouldn't be milled. The mice would eat half of it and it would go bad. And so the farmers were tempted to take their grain to a better mill where they could get it ground into corn rather than risk losing it altogether, as sometimes happened.
Thank you.
Okay, this is us back on the old stone bridge now, and we're coming to the end of the tour. We've done the full circuit, and I'll just finish off by telling you a few stories. Hopefully most of the stories I've told you have got some element of truth in them, but these ones perhaps less so. So when I was growing up in this village in the 50s and the 60s, there was an old lady. Her name was Nellie Patterson, and she lived in the weaver's cottage right up at the top of the road there. You can see through the trees. And Nellie was a village gossip. People did avoid her because she did gossip a lot and talk a lot, and you couldn't get away from her. But as a young kid, I didn't mind. I would get regaled for hours on end with some of the old stories, most of which I've forgotten now. I do recall that once a hot summer spell that we had, there was very little water in the burn and everyone in the village got ill. And I said to my father and mother, you know, the water tastes really strange, it tastes really bad. And I had a more sensitive taste than they did. But anyway, eventually they believed me, so we went up the burn to where the water inlet was for the water supply to the houses. And lying in the pool there, right over the water inlet, was a dead sheep brawling with maggots. So that was that problem. But that prompted a story from old Nellie, and she recalled that I don't know when, possibly in her lifetime when she was young, there was an outbreak of diphtheria in the village, which was quite common in Victorian times and earlier. And this was traced to a well where the village got its water from, apparently, although I could never understand why they didn't just get it from the burn. But anyway, they reckoned that this was the source, so the well was filled in, and it remains filled in to this day. I don't know where it is. On the subject of wells, further up the hillside, about a mile up the burn here, on the east bank, there's a well. It's called Topper Butter, and there used to be a cairn over it. I don't know if there still is. You used to be able to see it for miles around. But this is a Calibate well, and that is a red well, as it's sometimes called. And the iron ore in the ground, the iron salts, are brought to the surface by the water, and the ground around it was all a bright red. And the water, it had a very strong taste. It tasted, I don't know, like iron brew without the fizz and sugar maybe. But it was, old Nellie would ask us to go and fill some lemonade bottles with iron water, because she reckoned it was a good sort of tonic, and she would drink it. And I suppose it was. Another story, totally unrelated, but relating a bit more with our everyday business. The Battle of Killiecrankie is some history written by Mrs. Campbell, who was the owner of Urrard in the 1950s. And after the battle, the officers of both sides were buried in the marshy bit, the bog, near Urrard House. And Mrs. Campbell erected a memorial there. It was really a memorial for her son, Ian Campbell, who was killed in the Korean War in 1953, I think that was, or 52. And but also she's got a bit there about the soldiers of Killiecrankie, the officers being buried in that hallowed ground, which was a bog because nobody dared ever plough it up or graze it, and that's the reason it's still a bog to this day. Another interesting fact that she wrote down, or as I say fact, I guess you would have to call it legend, because it's not really recorded in any learned document, was that after the battle, and bear in mind this took place in the summer, there wasn't much water in the burns, but the foot soldiers weren't so fortunate as the officers. They didn't bury them, but they dammed up the two burns, the one on each side of each wing of the battle. The River Gurnig at Killiecrankie, they dammed it up with a huge pool, and they did the same with the smaller burn here, the All Clune burn, further up there. They dammed that up, and they took all the bodies and they threw them into the pools. And they waited until September, when there were heavy rains and the burns were in flood, and they breached the dams, and all the bodies floated down here, all the way down to the River Garry, onto the Tummel and the Tay, and out through Perth, someone else's problems. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but quite feasible, I think. So that concludes our story of All Clune. Thank you for joining us here today. We've enjoyed talking to you. If you have any comments or queries, or indeed anything you have to add to the All Clune story, we'd really be interested in hearing from you. Anecdotes, history, old images, just contact us through our website. And the website is www.soldiersofkilliecrankie, all one word, .co.uk. The Soldiers of Killiecrankie produce a story every month. It covers a wide variety of topics relating to the area, Jacobite history, social history, that sort of thing. So if you'd like to receive notifications from us, please subscribe to our mailing list. The details are on the website. So from James and I for today, thank you very much for your time. Goodbye, stay safe.